It's time for another 2020 college football team schedule preview, and up today is the Ohio State Buckeyes, and I'm excited to do this one. I've had a lot of people ask for this one, so we're going to knock it out today, Ohio State from the Big Ten. Before we get to it, though, Ohio State is an interesting sort of case study or example in some of the weird psychology that goes on this channel in the comment section. For several years, from around, well, really 2016, 2017, and 2018, I did attract a lot of Ohio State viewers to the channel, but they were not happy with me because I didn't have a lot of good things to say about Ohio State in 16, 17, and 18. Of course, they had made the playoffs and got shut out, and I went on this tirade, and I was like, they should be barred from the playoffs for 3 years or whatever it was. And then during each of those next couple of seasons, they had those unexplainable losses where they not only lost, but got blown out by inferior teams, Iowa, Purdue, wasn't it? And of course, they didn't make the playoffs in those years. And all in the comment section on this channel, the Ohio State fan, this guy just hates Ohio State. He doesn't know anything about football. He's just an SEC homer. He's a Georgia fan. What do you expect? This guy's obsessed with Ohio State. He just hates Urban Meyer. He just hates this player. He just hates that player. He's just anti-Ohio State. Of course, none of that stuff is true. Okay, maybe the Urban Meyer thing is true. I do think Urban Meyer's a disgusting human being who makes up fake health conditions to weasel his way out of bad situations. But he's done it multiple times. I mean, I don't think I'm going out on a limb when I suggest that. But anyway, he's gone from there now, so no point in beating that dead horse. But then 2019, Ohio State had a good team. And what did I say all during the season about Ohio State? They're a good team. In fact, I said over and over again from about week 2 or 3 of the 2019 season that Ohio State looked like the best and most complete team in all of college football. It was no surprise to me they went undefeated. And we'll look briefly at the 2019 schedule in a minute, but not only did they go undefeated, they didn't even have any close games. But so then all the Ohio State fans who the 2 or 3 years prior had told me I was an idiot, didn't know anything about football, I just hate Ohio State, all this. All those same people were in the comment sections letting me know how great the videos were. It just was weird. And I sort of say that all the time that, people base their opinion of me on whether or not they agree with me, right? If I say something, not everyone, but with Ohio State, it was just a prime example. If they agree with what I'm saying at that particular time, they love the channel. It's a great channel. I know my college football, blah, blah, blah. If they disagree with what I'm saying, then I'm just an idiot and yada, yada, yada. And the Ohio State thing is just a perfect example of that. The 180 that Ohio State fans pulled in terms of how they view this channel from 16, 17, and 18 to 2019 was nothing short of hilarious. Anyway, let's get on with today's video, the schedule preview 2020 for Ohio State. All right, good morning, and that's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right, it's me, Uncle Lou, live for you on LouTube today. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it also. And in addition to that, blah, 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 blah. Subscribe to this channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year. Some of them are even watchable. Like I said in the beginning, if you agree with me, you probably consider it watchable. If you don't, well, then maybe you don't. Anyway, up today, Ohio State. Let's jump right into it. I'm going to put the 2019 schedule up on the screen real quick here. So we have a baseline of a reference point, really, for when we look at the 2020 schedule. Now, I'm not talking wins and losses here when we get to the 2020 schedule. We're purely just looking at the schedule itself. Is it easier than 2019 or harder? What about the road games? What about the non-con games? That kind of thing. I'll do a preview later when it gets closer to the season where I try to determine a team's records and who they might beat and who they might lose to. I think it's ridiculous to do that at this point in the year. We haven't even had spring practice. We don't even know who the starting quarterback or multiple starting positions really for almost all of these teams. So anyway, this is the 2019 schedule. Of course, they ran through it 12-0. Their closest game came next to the last week of the season at home against Penn State, where they won 28-17, an 11-point win. Other than that, they had 2 games that they won by 24 points. Those were the next closest. Look at the margin of victory last year for Ohio State and forget about who they played for. Who have they played? The whole Ohio State ain't played nobody. Yeah, right. They won by 24, 42, 41, 71, 41, 24, 49, 49, 49 once, I'm sorry. 31, 59, 35, 11, and 29. That was the regular season. Then they won the Big 12 or the Big 10 title game by 13 over Wisconsin, but this is just a regular season thing. So they absolutely destroyed everybody they played. All season was the who have they played thing for Ohio State. Well, they played Penn State, a top 15 team. They played Michigan, a top 15 team. They played Cincinnati, a top 20 team. They played Michigan State, an okay team. They played Wisconsin, a top 10-ish, 15-ish team. They played plenty of good teams. Their last 3 games of the season, if you include the Big Ten title game, Penn State, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Those are all 3 top 15 teams. The idea that Ohio State didn't play anybody was ridiculous. Now, their non-con schedule was not all of that. They did play Cincinnati, and Cincinnati was a pretty good team last year. They were ranked almost the entire season. For a long time, their only loss was to Ohio State, and Ohio State beat them 42-0. Not trying to pump up Cincinnati, but they were one of the best 5 or 6 group of 5 teams. Not a great team. I'm not trying to say that they are. But Ohio State has some good wins. Of course, it ended in the playoff game against Clemson, and there's no point in rehashing that. It was a great game. And honestly, if they played 10 times, I would probably put my money on Ohio State to beat Clemson more times than they lost out of 10 games. But that doesn't matter. You only played them once and they beat you. So that's just what it is. But you had a pretty good season. Ended a little bit short of where you hoped it would, but you did have a good season. All right, now let's look at the 2020 schedule. I'll put it up on the screen and we'll compare. You guys think this is going to be a more difficult road for Ohio State in 2020 than it was in 2019 based purely off the schedule? Or is it going to be easier? I'll run through the schedule and I'll give you some thoughts on it. You open up at home with Bowling Green. Then you go on the road week 2, a Power 5 matchup this year on the road against Oregon. That'll be a big game. Home against Buffalo, home against Rutgers. Then you get your bye week. Pretty good place for a bye week, I guess, in terms of where it falls in the schedule, especially when you look at the string of games that comes up after it. This is brutal. Home against Iowa, at Michigan State, at Penn State, home against Nebraska. That's not an easy stretch of games right there. That's a tough 4-game stretch. Michigan State, new coaching staff, we'll see. Penn State, I think, is going to be really, really good. Nebraska still looking to sort of become a good program under Scott Frost. Will 2020 be the year? Who knows? But that's a tough 4 stretch of games right there. Then you have Indiana at home, back-to-back road games here at Maryland, at Illinois, and you finish things up at home against Michigan, who you've owned and dominated most of this century, honestly. But a long time since Michigan has beat you. But you have to at least assume the possibility exists right now for that to be a difficult game, depending on how good or Michigan might end up being in 2020. So let's sort of compare what we have here. Well, the non-con schedule is definitely more difficult in 2020, in my opinion, than it was in 2019. Having to play on the road at Oregon is more difficult than any non-con game you had in 2019, and I think you would agree. Again, you played FAU, Cincinnati, and Miami of Ohio. Cincinnati was a decent team, but it's a group of 5 team. You played them at home. Totally different this year, 2020, week 2, going on the road and having to play at Oregon, a top 10 team. And they'll be top 10 in every single preseason poll, I would imagine. So that's going to be a tough game. That's not to say that you can't win it, but clearly I think this non-con schedule more difficult than last year. You also have Bowling Green and Buffalo. Buffalo is not quite in the Cincinnati territory in terms of trying to figure out how good they are or aren't. They're an okay group of 5 team. I don't think they're even on a Cincinnati's level, again, who you beat 42-0 last year. You get them at home and you get Bowling Green at home. Neither of those games really should provide much of a test for Ohio State, but sandwiched in between that, the first 3 weeks is that trip to Oregon. That'll be tough. And then you play your first Big Ten game at home against Rutgers. They've been a pretty bad team for a long time. They're bringing Greg Schiano back to try to get things turned around there. He had some success there in his previous stint as head coach there before he got a job in the NFL with Tampa Bay, I believe it was, right? Then he's been back in college now for a while as a coordinator and an assistant. Now he gets another shot as head coach back at Rutgers again. We'll see. I don't think anybody expects any sort of miracle turnaround year 1 there. If he's going to do anything, I think it's going to take a few years to build that program back up. You have to assume at this point, probably a win in your bye week. But again, after that bye week, these 4 games here, Iowa, Michigan State, Penn State, and Nebraska, that's a tough 4 stretch of games. The first one at home against Iowa. But then you have back-to-back road games at Michigan State and at Penn State, and you finish things up at home with Nebraska. It's going to be tough to go 4-0 in that stretch of games. You did not have a stretch of games last year that came close to that, a 4-game stretch. The toughest stretch of games you had last year, now the last 2 was Penn State and Michigan. That was a tough 2 stretch of games. But if you look at your schedule last year, Maryland, Rutgers, Penn State, Michigan, that's not tougher than the 4 stretch of games you have this season. You also played Indiana, Miami of Ohio, Nebraska, and Michigan State 4 weeks in a row. That's not tougher than what you have this year. So that's a tough 4 stretch of games. And you finish things up on the back end, your last 4 games, home against Indiana, on the road at Maryland, on the road at Illinois, home against Michigan. So twice in 2020, you have back-to-back road games. When you're talking about a team like Ohio State, take really any of your top 10 teams, they're going to be favored in most of the games they play in the regular season, right? But very rarely does a team go undefeated in the regular season. Now, we've seen, of course, Ohio State do it last year, Clemson, we've seen Alabama do it. We've seen some teams do it, but it is hard to do and it's rare to do. So when you're looking at a team like Ohio State and you're trying to say, man, this schedule, can they go 12-0 again? They're probably going to be favored in most, if not all of those games. So you start thinking about, okay, where could they possibly trip up at, right? Trap games, things like that. Back-to-back road games are never easy. You have them twice. They're both back-to-back conference games. Now the second half, the second 2 back-to-back at Maryland, at Illinois, those aren't very good teams. It's likely you beat both of those, even though they're on the road. But you go back to that week 7 and 8 matchup at Michigan State, and that's the week after you play Iowa at home, which is going to be tough too. But at Michigan State, at Penn State. So again, this isn't a prediction or anything. I think Ohio State is better than every team on their schedule, but it's going to be harder for them to go 12-0 again. Not saying they can't do it. And again, I'll do these prediction videos where I pick a team's record and which teams I think they will lose to later in the offseason. This is just sort of getting an early look at the schedule. But let me know, what do you guys think about the schedule for Ohio State in 2020? As a college football fan, I'm looking forward to the week 2 matchup, Ohio State at Oregon. Now, Ohio State was supposed to play Georgia this year. We're supposed to have a home-and-home with Georgia. Ohio State backed out of that series to schedule this series with Oregon. So we'll see how it works out. They got to go on the road and play them week 2. A lot of eyeballs will be on that game early in the season. So let me know, what do you think? Is it easier, harder, about the same? If you want to take a stab at the record in the comments, feel free. Again, I'll do that later in the offseason. But that's going to do it for the 2020 schedule preview for Ohio State. I appreciate you guys watching. Have a good morning.
Damn, son, where'd you find this?